anger lingers in South Los Angeles. This community rallying attention to problems like poverty still plaguing street corners that burned into the night back in 1992. The riots, a reaction to the brutal tactics of the LAPD at the time when 4 officers were acquitted for the beating of Rodney King, caught on camera. The spark that ignited a fire, neighborhoods descended into chaos. In 6 days, over 12,000 arrested, more than 2,000 injured, and nearly 60 dead.
There are fires all over the city. So this side is on fire and people are looting over here.
LA native Jasmine Canick was just 14, the rioting right outside her window.
You knew that something was terribly wrong when you have that many people angry and upset in the street.
Yet she never left, a community voice for neighborhoods still struggling.
It's a disappointment to see any piece of land like this in LA still vacant, especially knowing the needs of the community. That is the real tragedy, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this episode, what we're going to do is we're going back to April 29th, 1992. On that day, a day that will live in infamy in this country. On that day, there was an uprising, if you will, in the city of Los Angeles. We're talking about the 1992 LA riots. It's really amazing to me that it's been 30 years. And it's the reason why I say that is because like so much of what happened back then leading up to the riots and seeing the riots and the fallout from it, so much of what we see today, you know, it still kind of exists. And it's like, you have to kind of stop and think like, damn, did we move anywhere? Was there any progress or anything like that? And, you know, that's a very valid question to ask. But I wanted to talk about it because I knew that this anniversary was coming up. And quite honestly, it was a tough part of our history, but a very necessary part. And it got us to where we are today. And then I also like talking about it because I can give you my experience as someone who lived through it, as opposed to maybe someone who's listening who either wasn't around or maybe were too young to remember. So let's go back. There were a lot of things that led up to the riots in Los Angeles. 2 things in particular that sped up the process, if you will. And I'm going to touch on both. The first thing was the senseless murder of 15-year-old Latasha Harlins. Latasha Harlins was, as I mentioned, a 15-year-old who was murdered by a convenience store owner. And then the second event obviously was Rodney King, the motorist, who was the black motorist, who was beaten. I think he was hit like over 80 times by 4 white cops after being pulled over for, I think he was evading cops or something like that. I can't remember what the charge was, but his beating was videotaped on, unbeknownst to the officers. It was videotaped by a man who videotaped it with his home camera from his balcony. And we'll talk about both. But I want to start with Latasha Harlins, her senseless and tragic murder. Latasha Harlins, as I mentioned, was a young lady, 15 years old. She was in high school at Westchester High School in Los Angeles. Just a random day on March 16th, 1991. She and her cousin had gone to the store. It was a local liquor store, and she went there to purchase some orange juice. She went to this place called Empire Liquor. It was located at the intersection of West 91st Street and South Figueroa Street in Vermont Vista section of Los Angeles. And there she encountered the store owner, a lady by the name of, what was her name? Soon Ja Du. And long story short, there was a confrontation. Latasha went to purchase a bottle of orange juice that cost $1.79. But before she could purchase it, Du accused her of attempting to steal it. And she did not see the money in Latasha Harlan's hand. She claimed that she asked if she intended to pay for the orange juice, and 2 eyewitnesses later verified that she did have the money and she never put it in her book bag. But the thing about that confrontation was that was something that was very common. In that particular time in Los Angeles, there were a lot of Korean business owners who had businesses in, South Central Los Angeles or in Los Angeles, period, all over Los Angeles. And their clientele and the people who came in and shop with them were mostly Black people. And a lot of times Black people felt harassed, or they were always, felt like they were watched or, racially profiled, if you will. And the same thing happened to Latasha at this time. So what happens from there is, based on different accounts. But after that, what happened was Latasha made an attempt to walk away. Du grabbed her. They tussled. She pushed her down, meaning Latasha pushed Du down, put the orange juice back on the counter and actually handed it to her. Because Latasha hit her twice, knocking her down to the ground. After that, Latasha Harlins backed away. Miss Du angrily threw a stool at her. The bottle had dropped during the scuffle that they had. Latasha picked it up off the ground, handed it to Du, who snatched the bottle from her. Harlins then turned around to walk out of the store. Now, keep in mind, she's got money in her hand. The bottle of orange juice is back in Soon Ja Du's hand. So no harm, no foul, right? It's just a confrontation that happened to get physical, but, she's walking away. And as she turns and walks away to leave, Soon Ja Du reaches under the counter, grabs a revolver. She retrieved a revolver, my bad, and fired a shot from behind from about 3 feet away, striking Latasha Harlins in the back of the head, killing her instantly. Now, Soon Ja Du said that this was in self-defense. She would later testify in court that she feared for her life. Doesn't that sound familiar? And she murdered a 15-year-old girl, a girl who was just starting life. Shot her in the back of the head as she attempted to walk away. And all of this was confirmed on videotape. She was walking away, right? She gets shot in the back of the head. Well, it goes to trial. A jury finds that, she was guilty of voluntary manslaughter, and the jury recommended that she get a maximum of 16 years in prison. However, the trial judge, a judge by the name of Joyce Carlin, reversed it and sentenced Soon Ja Du to 5 years probation, 10 years of a suspended prison sentence, 400 hours of community service, and a $500 fine. Yeah. She got off for killing Latasha Harlins. And this happened. She was murdered in March of 1991. The trial happened in November of 1991. And it went all the way. Of course, they appealed it. It went all the way up to the state Supreme Court. And a state appeals court upheld Judge Carlin's sentencing decision 3-0 on April 21st, 1992. About a week before the LA riots happened. And when I tell you, people were pissed, people were furious, particularly black people. And again, there was a battle between black people and Koreans in LA. Even someone like myself who did not live in LA, I think I'd only been to LA at that particular time only once because I went for the Super Bowl. But I knew about that. And here's the thing. Because it was 1991 and there was obviously no internet, no social media, we did not see this murder. Now, later on, it would be, available for people to see or what have you. And I remember seeing the grainy photo or whatever. And Latasha Harlins clear. I mean, like, she's damn near out the door. And this lady shoots in the back of the head. And so even the information, how it was disseminated to us, because I was at the time of all of this, I was at South Carolina State University, a freshman. And, we still couldn't believe it. Like, she just shot her in cold blood. And I mean, again, people were outraged. So that was one domino of the several dominoes that led to the 1992 riots. The second and pivotal one, well, they both were pivotal, but this one was, just as major. It actually happened a couple of weeks before Natasha Harlins was murdered. On March 3rd, 1991, Rodney King, as I mentioned, was evading police, and he got pulled over, and the cops started whipping his ass. And I mean, like, I don't know how many times he got hit, but the thing that was interesting was, again, as I mentioned earlier, as they were beating him, unbeknownst to them, it was being videotaped. And I want to say maybe about 4 or 5 days after this happened, a local news station in LA got this tape. And once they got this tape, it spread like wildfire. I mean, like, it hit CNN and it hit every major news outlet. And when I tell you, we were able to see it in South Carolina on CNN like everybody else, and it was on the national news. It was the lead story on the national news. And Rodney King was this guy who obviously none of us had ever heard of, but he was this guy who was just getting beaten to damn near to death by these cops. And then by the time Rodney King gets out of the hospital, he is now a public figure. He does a press conference, and I mean, his face is still swollen. His eyes, they cracked his orbital bone like he had broken ribs. Like, he was messed up. And I just remember seeing that, watching that video. And I've never watched the video through its entirety. I think I saw enough in the 20 or 30 seconds that I saw. But I think even back then, it was so troublesome. It was bothersome because, as a young black man coming up, I mean, like, we were always told, like, look out for the cops, look out for the cops. And so I was always leery of cops. And I mean, I've done a podcast, and I'm sure you guys have heard it. If not, you can go back and listen to it in archives about my experiences with the police. That podcast is called Sound of the Police. Check it out. But no, I mean, like, and I've heard stories. I've heard stories about guys getting beat up by cops. I've heard stories about black men, and I'm talking about as a child. I've heard stories about black men, suddenly, all of a sudden, dying in police custody. not really knowing, the full story. Like, oh yeah, he suffocated. Okay, well, how did he suffocate? He's in jail, he's in the prison cell by himself. Oh, he hung himself. Huh? What? And I mean, like, these were stories, and these stories were, passed throughout the neighborhood. Not anyone that I knew personally, but still, black men dying at the hands of the police. So we were taught, to be fearful and leery of police. That's just the way we were taught, especially in the 90s. And so to see Rodney King get beat, man, I was just like, wow. But the underlying thought that we all had was, wow, they got it on tape. I mean, we were so happy. I mean, we weren't happy about the fact that he got beat, but we were very happy about the fact that it was all on tape. I mean, like, it was right there. You couldn't deny it. All of the officers were identified. I mean, like, it was there. And so deep down, we're thinking, okay, these cops are going to get it, because they got brought up on charges and everything. And we're like, yeah. And I'll be honest, like, I didn't watch much of it. I mean, of course, again, it's 1992 at this point, by the time it goes to trial. And I didn't watch much of that stuff. A lot of the stuff was on CNN, but I kept, a little bit abreast of what was going on, but it wasn't like there was court TV back then. But an interesting thing that happened during the trial was moved from LA County, where it happened, to Simi Valley, Lillywhich white suburbs. And so, Rodney King wasn't going, or excuse me, these officers were not going to be judged by a jury of their peers in the county in which, this happened. For all I know, they could have lived in whatever counties Simi Valley sits in. And I thought that was very pivotal. I remember thinking that, and I was like, well, why are they moving the trial? When I heard that they were moving the trial, I was like, oh, this don't sound too good. And you kind of knew at that point the fix was in. Like, something wasn't right. And I remember when the verdict came down on April 29th, I was in class, and I just gotten out of class, and I remember I was coming back from the cafeteria. Me and my boys were coming back, and somebody said, it was like, yo, CNN said that, they're going to read the verdict, the Rodney King verdict. So what? And that was the thing too. Like, it was always perpetuated as the Rodney King verdict. Rodney King wasn't on trial. You understand? Like, he wasn't on trial. And even subsequently, the people after all hell broke loose, they called it the Rodney King riots. It wasn't the Rodney King riots. Rodney King didn't throw one brick. He didn't rob one liquor store. But, that's what it was. And that's the way that it was portrayed in the media. And again, I want you to understand, like, in 1992, we didn't have the access to media that we have now. I mean, like, you can just open up your phone and you can see whatever news feed that you want to see. But I mean, like, back then it was CNN and it was your local news. It really, I mean, Fox might have been a thing, but I don't really remember watching Fox. I just remember CNN was the place that you got world news. And here's the thing about CNN. CNN was the only outlet, I think, at the time that was on 24/7. Like, your local news and your local stations went off at 2 a.m. CNN all night long, 24/7. So that's where we saw everything kind of play out. So once the verdict was read and these cops got off, I was like, what the fuck? Like, how does this happen? Like, I call me crazy. Normally I'm pretty optimistic or pessimistic, if you will, about things, but I really thought, like, they were going to do time. Like, 20, 30 years. I thought that the time that they were facing, they were going to jail, right? And so my reaction was one of disappointment and anger. Not anger to the point where I would want to go burn something down, but I understood how and why someone would feel that way. So I remember me and my boy, we was talking and, talking to a couple of cats, a couple of my teammates in the dorm, turned the TV off, and we went back outside and was kicking it on the Ave on campus. And I remember coming back in the dorm. I was in Bethea Hall. Shout out to Bethea. And I remember walking past somebody's dorm room and they had the door open. And I just remember, I remember one of my teammates saying, "Oh, they're about to fuck up LA." And I was like, huh? Because like at this point in time, like I don't know what's going on. I don't know that this is happening. But I do remember them saying that, like they're about to fuck up LA. And it just kind of went through one ear and out the other. But that's exactly what happened. I remember just a couple of months ago listening to this podcast, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes for you guys to check it out. It's called Slow Burn. Slow Burn was this was Slow Burn season 6, I think. It was hosted by Joel Anderson, who did a great job. 8 episodes that gives you a detailed breakdown of LA and the riots. It came out late last year in 2021. Phenomenal podcast episodes. And episodes run about 40 minutes long. It's a must listen. And I remember listening to it, and one of the things I learned a lot behind the scenes, because obviously I wasn't in LA when it happened, right? But one of the things that I learned was the first incident happened in this neighborhood, and there was a boy who had thrown a rock at a cop's car or something like that, and the cops go to arrest him. So they roll up on him and they come and get him or whatever like that. And there's these 2 dudes who are in their own vehicle and they got a camcorder. Now, and let me just break something down real quick for you folks. Back then, again, we didn't have cell phones. So if you were going to record someone, you had to have a camcorder. And I mean, a camcorder is not something that, I'm not talking about the little handheld joints. I'm talking about the big joints, like literally like a cameraman. And so it's something, it's not necessarily heavy, but it's, it's something big to be kind of lulling around. But these guys had this camcorder and they're in this neighborhood, and cops go to arrest this kid, 15, 16-year-old kid, for throwing a rock at a car. And as they're about to take him in, a crowd forms. So they start calling for backup. And so by the time, people, around this time, the verdict is already out. So people are starting to take to the streets. As soon as the verdict was read, there were people that ran up on the police station downtown. And, in this particular neighborhood, and I can't remember what neighborhood it was, but this young kid was about to go to jail, and the people weren't having it. Like, they weren't having it at all. It was 35 cop cars and over 200 people in the street in this neighborhood, and they're going off on the cops. They're cussing at the cops. They're spitting on them and everything. And then the call comes through to retreat. And at that point, the cops start pulling out. They start pulling out of this neighborhood. And one guy said on camera, he said, well, hey, he said it was a win for us. He was like, but I thought that they were going to leave, get more backup, come back down here and start a war. But they didn't. Now, as LA is starting to bubble, the chief of police, a guy by the name of Daryl Gates, is nowhere to be found. In the first 3 or 4 hours of the riots, Daryl Gates was nowhere to be found. He was actually hiding in his office, but nobody knew. And Daryl Gates is a guy, and they talked about this on Slow Burn. He's a guy who came up through the ranks. He was a guy who, in the police department's eyes, led them through the 65 Watts riots. Look that up if you're not familiar with the 65 Watts riots that happened in LA. But he was a guy that kind of made his name as far as the procedures and all the stuff that he put in, he implemented or whatever like that. He was supposed to be the hot shot guy, whatever the case may be. Long story short, Daryl Gates was, and then Daryl Gates actually, in the days leading up to the verdicts being given, he put out a statement. He put out a 5-minute video that was disseminated to, the police officers saying that, hey, the blacks, the blacks are going, he didn't say the blacks, but for full effect, I'll just say the blacks. The blacks are going to, some of the black leaders will be in an uproar if the verdicts don't go their way. So we have to be prepared. So, he'd put a contingency plan in place in the event the verdict did not go in black people's favor. He had put a contingency plan in place. And so he had already got a budget for $1 million for overtime for these officers. So they were going to work the streets and make sure that law and order was restored. Now, here's the thing. Gates had the mindset of what happened in 65, where a lot of the damage and everything was done at night. So he thought that if there's a disturbance, if the verdict is read during the day, if there's a disturbance, it's going to be at night. Wrong answer. Because LA got set off damn near as soon as that verdict came down. People started going to the streets, and before you know it, you started seeing smoke. Buildings were being set on fire. Stores were being robbed and looted. Like I said earlier, it's hard for me at that position where I was at that time, because I could have been more than like 18 years old. I understood it. And I kind of justified with myself, like, if I was in LA, I'd be out there too. I mean, I probably wouldn't be, but because they ain't really my steez or how I get down, but still, I understand. And, they had a reason to be out there. They had like all of this stuff, when you had the Natasha Harlins and you had the Rodney King, and then the years and years and years of police brutality. And I mean, we knew from NWA about how cops used to, mess with black people, and, just for no reason, just messing with them for no reason. And so, like, you felt it bubbling. I mean, and NWA talked about this in 87, 88, 89. This is 92. So if you go back and listen to some of that music is like a precursor to the riots. Some of the stuff that Ice Cube was talking about, some of the stuff that Dre was talking about. Definitely some of the stuff that NWA was talking about. Go listen to Fuck the Police. It's there. So after that, like I said, what happened was the epicenter became the intersection of Florence and Normandy. Huge intersection. It was called South Central LA, then but now it's South LA. And I tell you, it's honestly, it's kind of weird, because I was just in LA a couple months ago, and riding through that intersection now, kind of visualizing how it was back then as far as what I saw on TV, it felt weird, but I went through it, but anyway, Florence and Normandy became the epicenter of the LA riots, particularly on the first day. Like I said, stores were looted, businesses were burned. And what happened was the police basically were told to come off the streets, because honestly, they weren't prepared for this. They were not prepared for everything, for all the smoke, no pun intended, for all of the smoke that they were about to get. And so, if you're familiar with the LA riots, you know the story of Reginald Denny, white motorist, truck driver who's driving through that intersection, got snatched out of his truck, got smashed in the face with a brick. All of it caught on camera by the helicopter hovering above. And the thing about it was that it was total anarchy. Like, it was just so much violence in the streets that, like, the cops were told, to retreat. And then there was rumors. I don't know this to be true, but there were rumors that, people were shooting and robbing firefighters and stuff like that. So even firefighters couldn't get close to, to putting some of the fires out. So it was just a crazy situation. In fact, I got into it and talked a little bit about it with the homie, my boy Baylor. Shout out to BTG, who came on my podcast late last year. We talked about it. He actually shared a story about his dad putting a TV on the back of a pickup truck, which was a funny story, man. Shout out my boy Baylor. But Baylor's somebody who is from LA, like born and raised. So like, he was living through this time. He was young, but he was out there, and he was active. I'll just put it like that. But he talked about it on the podcast. Go check that podcast out. It's called California Love. Shout out to Baylor. But yeah, there were no police. There were no firefighters. So anything that was set on fire burned. And I mean, it burned to the ground. And so, like, you couldn't do anything. And there was nobody stopping anybody. And this was the first day. LA went up in smoke. And the one thing that I learned from the Slow Burn podcast, was later that day, Daryl Gates actually went to a function. He went to a fundraiser, some fundraiser about, police reform or something like that. But it was out in like Hollywood or some shit like that. He went to kick with the white folks. And, there's audio of him being there, and he's talking to people and telling people how much he loves them and they're going to take care of them and all of this stuff like that. And he was there to raise money while his city was on fire, literally. And so after the first day, man, it's like, I think the numbers were like 4 people dead, 106 injured. There was like over 150 fires. And honestly, there were a lot of people that thought, okay, particularly in the police department, that okay, that was the storm. We're good. Everything will be back in order. And the police kind of regrouped or what have you. But they didn't know what was going to happen on day 2. If you thought day 1 was bad, day 2 was even worse. So many businesses were set on fire. Some of the people out there were targeting specifically Korean-owned businesses. And the reason being is because of the murder of Latasha Harlins. Soon Ja-Do became a flashpoint for, people out there in the streets, the brothers and sisters that were out there in the streets. And I don't want, when I say brothers and sisters, I don't even want to make it sound like it was just black people, because it was black, it was white, it was Hispanic, it was some Asian Americans. It was a rainbow. And ironically, I found that it said, there was a report that said like over 50% of the people that were arrested were Hispanic. That I did not know, especially from the news coverage, because when they showed the news coverage, it was a number of black people running up in spots. But what happened was the Korean community got to the point where they on day 2, they felt like they had to defend their businesses. And they were some of them were literally going to their businesses in South LA and with guns, arming themselves. One guy was standing on top of the building and he was, anybody that got close, he was shooting in the air. He wasn't shooting at him, but he was shooting in the air. A security guard got killed. I mean, it was literally like the Wild Wild West. And the crazy part about it was, for the most part, for someone like me in South Carolina, we could see it all on TV. Not the same way that we see, riots and things like that now. I mean, most recently the George Floyd, everything that happened after his murder, wherein you could jump on Twitter or jump on Facebook or IG and you could see everything. Like you could see it from the streets, people out there marching and protesting. It wasn't like that, but CNN, I mean, like they gave you 24/7 coverage. And I mean, like this was the first time that we could see something in real time, at least that I can remember, something that we could see in real time and like just the destruction. And how it played back for us was different because, again, like I said, I was in college at South Carolina State University. It's in Orangeburg, South Carolina, right? And so while we felt connected, Orangeburg and LA are a gazillion miles away, right? So, but I do remember the anger, and we all were angry. And I remember, somebody in the dorm saying like, yo, man, we should go tear up some shit. And I'm like, for who? For what? Like, for me, I mean, I couldn't get down like that because it'd be different if that happened in Orangeburg or if it happened in my hometown of Florence, South Carolina. That'd be different. But as bad and as mad as I felt about Rodney King, I couldn't see myself going and breaking into a liquor store. Well, one, I didn't drink liquor at that point in time of my life, but I couldn't see me going in and breaking into a liquor store while doing it in the name of, being mad at police or, what they did or those cops getting off. I could personally, I just couldn't do it. But I do know some people who were like, yo, we're going to break into this store. And I'm not going to name the store because they actually did break in the store and they stole some stuff. And what was interesting was like some of the stuff that they stole, like, bruh, you're going to break into a clothing store. If you break into a clothing store, it would probably be in your best interest to get clothes that you can wear or that someone that can wear. Man, these dudes came back to the dorm with like youth t-shirt. I'm like, bro, what you gonna do with a youth t-shirt? Give it to your little brother? But I mean, like that was a thing. Like, people were breaking into stuff and I'm sure, and like I said, me and Baylor talked about it. People were breaking, coming up on stuff, And I mean, if you walking past a store and the store is, been broken into, why not? At least that was my thinking back then. But yeah, it really, day 2 really, really divided the blacks and the Koreans. There were over 100 Korean stores that were robbed or burned. And all the while this is happening, guess who we haven't heard from? Now, we've heard from political leaders. We've heard from Daryl Gates. We've heard from the mayor, Tom Bradley, who's black, asking for calm and for peace. And the one person that we did not hear from at that particular time within the first couple of days of the riots was, you guessed it, Rodney King. Rodney King, I found out later, was, he was in the cut. He was chilling. He wasn't out there doing anything. I mean, and his lawyer approached him and said, hey, Rodney, you got to say something. You got to do something. We got to make a statement. We got to, ask for calm because, his lawyer didn't say this on the Slow Burn podcast, but I think I'm pretty sure that the LA, the powers that be, as far as the police department, put him up to it, like, hey, get Rodney out here to calm these people down. Because it was, again, this was, by the time Rodney spoke to the people, I want to say it was like 3 days in. This went on for this riot went on for 5 days. Like, literally, LA was up in smoke. Now keep in mind, it's already notorious for its smog, but the smoke was so bad in LA from the fires that were being burned on the businesses that were lit ablaze, that airplanes couldn't even fly into LA. Like, they had to change some of their routes and stuff like that. It was crazy. And again, mass destruction, people dying, businesses being destroyed, billions of dollars being lost. And, the sad part is that a lot of it, happened in, predominantly black communities like South LA. But, and I know, like, a lot of people even at the time would say, well, why would you destroy your own community? Why would you tear your stuff down? Why would you burn your stuff up? You got to understand, like, it's systematic racism is just that. When you have a situation where you confine people to a specific area and you don't necessarily give them the tools to help them, or at least assist them in upward mobility, or where they can move out, you redline areas and section things off to where, no, this black person can't stay in Brentwood. No, this black person can't stay in Beverly Hills. Or no, this Hispanic brother can't stay in, Malibu. And you relegate them to an area. I mean, people are going to be people. And it's systematic. And then you give them very little. And then you expect them to be cool when you give them a hard time about the little stuff that they have. And again, I don't want anybody to think that I'm advocating for burning down your own communities and tearing shit up. But sometimes you got to burn down shit and tear shit up. Honestly. And that's really what it came to. And I feel bad because, South LA is a much different place now. And I'm sure that there are places that you can go, and Baylor will tell you this. I'm sure there's places you can go in LA that never recovered from the riots. And that's the sad part, because there are parts of LA right now that used to be, where black people used to live, and they can't even afford to live now because of gentrification. But again, all of this stuff was going on, and Rodney King had not said a word publicly. Again, he didn't have Twitter. He didn't have Instagram, so he couldn't just, shoot some tweets off. So anyway, his lawyer goes to him and said, hey, Rodney, we need you to say something. So his lawyer prepares a 4-page statement. And Rodney King, he goes to his apartment, picks out something for him to wear, like a suit or something that they bought him and everything. And they have his lawyer has this grand idea about, what he should say and how it should sound and so forth and so on. And so he writes this speech. According to the lawyer, it was a beautiful speech. Yeah, okay. If you say so. But Rodney King then gets an opportunity to face the media. And he has the 4-page statement with him. But before he steps to the podium, Rodney King puts the paper to the side, and he decides to go off the top and speak from the heart. And here's what he said.
Thanks for joining us. For the city of Los Angeles, a third day of tension and violence. As night approaches, police and National Guard units are out in force. Federal troops are on standby. Violence in the city appeared to die down a bit today, but the toll is obvious. 37 people dead, more than 1,300 injured, more than 4,000 arrested. Damage estimate, $200 million and rising. 4,000 National Guard troops have joined the contingent of police and California Highway Patrol officers on the streets. More are on the way. A few hours ago, the man who's become the unwilling symbol of this outbreak of violence decided it was time to speak out. Rodney King appealed for peace.
I just want to say, can we all get along? Can we get along? Can we stop making it horrible for the older people and the kids? And I mean, we've got enough smog here in Los Angeles, let alone to deal with the setting these fires and things. It's just not right. It's not right, and it's not gonna change anything. We'll get our justice. They've won the battle, but they haven't won the war. We'll have our day in court, and that's all we want. And just, I love, I'm neutral. I love people of color. I'm not like they picking me out to be. We've got to quit. We've got to quit. After all, I mean, I can understand the first upset for the first 2 hours after the verdict, but to keep going on like this, and to see the security guard shot on the ground, it's just not right. It's just not right, because those people will never go home to their families again. And I mean, please, we can get along here. We all can get along. We just gotta, I mean, we're all stuck here for a while. Let's try to work it out. Let's try to beat it, let's try and work it out.
I think the thing about Rodney King at that particular time, I commend him for trying to go off the top and say what he wanted to say, but he suffered a lot. I mean, like, he had brain damage, from the beating that he took. And he probably wasn't the most articulate person prior to, being beaten, because I think he was a high school dropout. So, and he had been in and out of jail a couple of times, just nothing major, but, he wasn't the guy to deliver that. And I don't want to sound like I'm bumping for him, but I have a better understanding now after understanding who he was. But let me tell you something, folks. Rodney King caught hell for what he said. Can't we all just get along? I mean, like, people were pissed. Like, I can't believe, man, we out, because people literally were in the streets yelling, "This is for Rodney King." They were whipping people's ass. "This is for Rodney King." They were setting shit on fire. "This is for Rodney King." They were literally chanting his name in the streets. His name rang out in every street in LA. And he gets on TV and says, "Can't we all just get along?" And it didn't come off well at all. I mean, Rodney King really became, after, of course, the aftermath of the riots, I mean, he became the butt of a lot of jokes. I mean, a lot of jokes. And, he tried. He tried, but it didn't. I don't know what was on that paper. I don't know if it would have been, really in his best interest in reading what was on that paper, because what was on that paper probably wouldn't have sounded any more authentic, but he shouldn't have done that. Can't we all just get along? It's like you're making it. People felt like he was giving them an out. And, Rodney King in the media, as far as how he was covered, all the way up until the time that the verdicts were read, he was never painted as a good guy. He was always painted as this guy that, had run-ins with the law, and he ran from the cops, and they stopped short of saying this is why the cops bust your ass, like that. So for him to get on TV and say, can't we all just get along? I mean, like, if you do any research, you type in anything about Rodney King, that's the first thing that comes up. Can't we all just get along? Like, people forget that he got his ass whooped. Like, that's the first thing that comes up. And I understand and kind of get where he was coming from. And again, I don't necessarily know that he was the most articulate person to try to deliver that message at the time, because he was hurting and he saw that his city was hurting. But at the same time, bruh, if I could put myself in Rodney King's shoes, there's no way I'm getting on TV and saying, can't we all just get along? Depending on the day, depending on the person, they might get up there and say, man, fuck the police. I don't know. But I'll be honest, I was disappointed in Rodney King. And again, I didn't know Rodney. I was a kid in college. I didn't know any better, but I was disappointed. I was like, what? He said, what? It's like, man, fuck Rodney King. And that's how we felt, like, because it was like he wanted it to calm everybody down. And it wasn't time to be calm. It was gangs that was uniting, Bloods and Crips that was uniting. I mean, everybody was coming together. And, the LAPD realized that they had, trouble. And, they changed some things, but the LAPD is still the LAPD, man. Don't get it twisted. But, Rodney King, that's unfortunately, something that he'll be remembered for. All in all, it's weird to still think that this is 30 years ago, because it still feels like today. It still feels like today. You still have police brutality. You still have people taken to the streets. You still have civil unrest when cops get off for doing some shit that they shouldn't have done, killing innocent citizens. And so that's a little disheartening when you think about the fact that this happened 30 years ago. And it's like, damn, okay, this happened 30 years ago. And then you have George Floyd and everybody, all these other people that passed away and were murdered. I don't even want to get to naming them, but so what changed? Like, was there any change? Why wasn't there any change? There should have been some type of police reform. What was the police reform? Why did this happen? Why did this lady murder a 15-year-old girl and get community service? Are you kidding me? Now, granted, I think if you take the Rodney King beating, and if you take everything that happened with it and you put it in 2022, it doesn't play the same way. Does everything happen? Probably so. Because LA was bubbling at that time, honestly. And to be honest, it wasn't just LA, because LA was not the only place that was rioting. There were riots breaking out all across the country in the name of Rodney King, in the name of what was going on in LA. And that's when people were like, oh shit, we gotta fix this. But did they? Probably not as much as they would like you to believe that they did. But all in all, man, it was an interesting time. Again, I think it was interesting because, one, it's a part of history, and it's a part of history that you can't erase. And I just remember, being a young kid and thinking, okay, they got him on tape. Now what can they say? And then, like, now you get people on tape. I mean, George Floyd, I didn't look at it, but you saw a man put his knee on his neck for damn near 9 minutes. And he finally got convicted. But, what about the ones that didn't? And what about the riots and the civil unrest that happened? And what about the systematic racism? What about these impoverished places, like South LA, that get looked over? Because here's the thing, those people that lived in those communities, they got tired of getting looked over, tired of getting, harassed by the cops, tired of getting, the short end of the stick. Nobody that lives in those communities the people that live in South LA, they want the same thing for the people, like the people that live in Beverly Hills. White folks live in Beverly Hills. They want the same thing. They just don't want nobody standing in their way of getting what they want. And that's not asking for much, to be honest. But I'm glad that we have a podcast like mine or a podcast like Slow Burn that can tell you the history, because if we've learned nothing else over these last few years, is that history will happen. And if you allow people to change the narrative so that they don't look as bad, they will. But you damn sure better not let them do it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. This podcast drops every Thursday at midnight. From time to time, we will drop bonus episodes on Sundays at midnight. Be sure to check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com /12 Kyle spelled out. And again, that's going to do it for me. Again, thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time.